After 15 years of dedication, I thought my loyalty mattered. The company had been my second home, the place where I'd grown from an eager newcomer to a respected team leader. I'd given everything, late nights, missed family events, and countless ideas that had helped grow the business. My colleagues often joked that I knew the company better than the owners did. Maybe that was part of the problem. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Coffee in hand, I greeted the receptionist, waved to the IT guys, and settled at my desk to tackle the day's challenges. The email came at 9:17 a.m. Please see me in my office. Carter. No pleasantries, no explanation. Just a command. Wind thawing, I walked into his office. Carter didn't even look up from his computer. Close the door, he said, still typing. I sat down, a strange knot forming in my stomach. Finally, he turned to me, his expression vacant, almost bored. Melissa, we're letting you go, he said, leaning back in his chair, not even bothering to fake sympathy. His expensive watch gleamed under the fluorescent lights as he folded his arms. Shocked, I stammered, "Why?" The floor seemed to shift beneath me. He smirked. "You're easily replaceable." His words stung worse than the termination itself. "We need fresh blood, new perspectives, someone who costs less and complains less." I sat frozen, my mind racing through 15 years of memories, the Christmas parties I'd organized, the clients I'd secured, the weekends I'd sacrificed. "HR has your paperwork," he continued, already turning back to his computer. "Clear your desk by noon." Walking out, I felt everyone's eyes on me. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with genuine sadness. As I packed my things, I swallowed my anger, carefully placing photos and awards into a cardboard box. Carter had no idea what I was capable of, but he would. Oh, he absolutely would. The first week after losing my job, I convinced myself it was a blessing in disguise. "You'll find something better," friends assured me over sympathetic coffee meetups. "Someone with your experience will be snapped up in no time." I nodded and smiled, pretending to believe them. By week 3, that optimism had evaporated. My phone remained silent despite dozens of applications. When I did get interviews, they ended with the same vague promises to keep my resume on file. My savings dwindled rapidly. Rent, utilities, grocery bills. They didn't stop just because my income had. One evening, I found myself staring at a past due notice for my electricity bill. The red letters blurred as tears filled my eyes. This wasn't supposed to happen to people who did everything right. I had played by the rules, worked hard, been loyal. What did I have to show for it? Former coworkers reached out sporadically. Hanging in there, they'd text, but conversations faded quickly. A few mentioned the office had changed, lots of new faces, mostly recent graduates willing to work for entry-level salaries. One message, cut deeper than others. Carter had been bragging about streamlining operations at the last board meeting. Apparently, firing me had been just the beginning of his cost-cutting strategy. I scrolled through social media, a mistake I immediately regretted. There was Carter, smiling at a business lunch, announcing the company's exciting new direction. The comments section overflowed with congratulations. My stomach churned with a mixture of rage and humiliation. The rejection emails kept coming. "While your qualifications are impressive," they all began before delivering the same blow. Too experienced, too specialized, too expensive. One night, unable to sleep, I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Carter was probably sleeping soundly, not giving me a second thought. His arrogance, his dismissal of my worth fueled something in me. A spark of determination ignited. I refused to let his words define me. If no one would hire me, I'd create my own opportunity. I had experience, industry knowledge, and most importantly, I understood what clients truly needed. Now, all I needed was a plan. That night marked a turning point. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by rejected job applications and half-finished cover letters. My laptop displayed yet another form asking for the same information I'd entered dozens of times before. I closed it with a snap. Instead, I opened a blank document and began typing. Not a resume, but a business plan. The idea had been forming in my mind for days, but I'd been too afraid to acknowledge it. Now, with nothing left to lose, I let myself explore the possibility. What if I didn't need another job? What if I created my own? I knew the industry inside and out. 15 years had taught me not just how the business worked, but where it failed. Carter's company succeeded despite its flaws, overcharging clients, under-delivering on promises, treating everyone as replaceable. What if I built something better? By morning, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of purpose, I had outlined a company structure, potential services, and even drafted a mission statement. It wouldn't be easy. My savings, already stretched thin, would barely cover the basics. I'd need to work from home initially, keeping overhead low. But the numbers didn't lie. It was possible. That afternoon, I filed the paperwork to register my new business. The clerk smiled as she processed my forms. "Good luck," she said, handing me my receipt. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flutter of excitement instead of dread. Next came the hardest part. I opened my contact list and began making calls. These weren't job hunting calls. They were business development conversations. "I've started my own firm," I explained to former clients and industry connections. Some conversations were awkward, others surprisingly enthusiastic. "I always thought you were the one holding that place together," one client admitted. "Tell me more about what you're offering." Each night, I refined my pitch, adjusted my pricing, and built my website. The fear remained. What if this failed too? But beneath it, something stronger grew. Carter had called me replaceable, but he'd never understood my true value. I didn't just know how to do the work, I knew how to care about it. 1 month after being fired, I landed my first client. Small, but significant. When I signed the contract, my hands trembled slightly. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was my future, on my terms. I hadn't initially planned to target Carter's clients specifically. My focus was on building something new, not destroying what he had. But then my phone rang one Tuesday afternoon. It was Michael from Apex Industries, one of Carter's biggest accounts, one I'd personally managed for years. "Melissa, is it true you've gone solo?" His voice carried a note of hope that surprised me. "Yes, I have," I replied, straightening in my chair despite being alone in my home office. "I've started my own consultancy." Michael didn't hesitate. "We need to talk. Things haven't been the same since you left. The new guy they assigned us." He paused. "Let's just say we're not impressed." We met for coffee the next day. Michael looked tired, frustrated. "They've raised our rates twice since you left, and the quality has tanked. The last proposal they sent over was full of copy-paste errors. They didn't even change the previous client's name in some places." I listened, maintaining a professional demeanor, while internally my heart raced. By the end of our meeting, Michael had all but promised to bring Apex's business to me. "Just send over your proposal, make it competitive, and I'll handle the rest." That night I worked until 3 a.m, crafting the perfect proposal. Not just competitive pricing, but a detailed plan addressing Apex's unique challenges. Challenges I understood because I'd been working with them for years. 2 weeks later, Apex signed with me. The contract was worth more than enough to cover my expenses for 6 months. When Michael called to confirm, he added, "By the way, I've been talking to Janet at Meridian Group. She's interested too." Word spread quickly. Carter had taken me for granted, but his clients hadn't. They remembered how I'd answered their calls on weekends, how I'd learned the names of their children, how I'd caught problems before they became disasters. One by one, they reached out. "We only stayed because of you," another former client admitted during a meeting. The relationship was always with you, not the company. Within 2 months, I'd secured contracts with 5 former clients of Carter's firm. Each transition was smooth on my end, but created ripples I couldn't ignore. Industry newsletters mentioned shifting allegiances in the market. Competitors whispered about Carter's troubles. Through it all, I maintained a professional silence. I never badmouthed Carter or his company. I didn't need to. The quality of my work, my attention to detail, and my genuine care for my clients' success spoke volumes. While I built my business on solid foundations, Carter's began to show cracks that had always been there, cracks I had previously worked tirelessly to repair. I first noticed the change at an industry conference in the fall. Carter had always commanded attention at these events, holding court in the center of the room, loud and confident as people gravitated toward him. This time, he stood near the wall, nursing a drink alone. When our eyes met briefly across the room, he quickly looked away. I hadn't intended to track his downfall, but news traveled fast in our tight-knit industry. A vendor I'd worked with for years mentioned casually over lunch that Carter's company had missed payment deadlines twice in the past month. "Never happened when you were there," he noted, spreading butter on his bread. "Everything okay with them?" I shrugged and changed the subject, but privately, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. More rumors followed. Carter had lost the Westridge account, a client he'd personally wooed for years. His new team of inexperienced hires had bungled a major presentation using outdated data and misrepresenting key facts. A project manager had quit mid-contract, leaving clients frustrated and demanding refunds. A former colleague who still worked for Carter texted me late one night, "It's getting bad here. 3 people let go today. More cuts coming. Carter's in panic mode." I ran into Janet from Meridian Group at a coffee shop. She didn't mince words. "Your old boss is desperate to get us back. Offered a 40% discount on our next contract." She stirred her latte thoughtfully. "Too little, too late. We're happy with you." Carter's company had always operated on reputation, the illusion of success breeding more success. Now, that illusion was shattering. Potential clients hesitated to sign. Current clients began to question their loyalty. The younger, cheaper employees he'd hired to replace experienced staff like me made costly mistakes they didn't even recognize. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality of the business. Relationships mattered more than flashy presentations or aggressive pricing. He'd assumed the market would always favor him simply because it always had. But the numbers didn't lie. Financial reports showed his company's profits plummeting quarter after quarter. Industry analysts began to question the firm's stability. Whispers of bankruptcy circulated among competitors. I watched from a distance, focused on growing my own business rather than celebrating his decline. But I couldn't deny the poetic justice of it all. Carter had built a house of cards, believing himself untouchable. Now, a gust of wind was all it would take to bring everything crashing down around him. And that wind was already blowing. I still remember the exact moment I knew things had fundamentally changed. I was sitting in my new office, a real one now, not just my spare bedroom, reviewing quarterly projections with my small but growing team. My assistant knocked and entered, looking slightly bewildered. "Melissa, Westmark Technologies is on line 1. Their CEO wants to speak with you personally." Westmark was the white whale of our industry, a tech giant that rarely changed service providers and was notoriously demanding. They had been with Carter's firm since before I started working there. I had helped manage their account for years but had never been allowed to lead it. Carter always insisted on handling Westmark himself. "This is Melissa," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ms. Chen, this is Robert Westmark." His deep voice was unmistakable, even though we'd only met in person a handful of times. "I'll get straight to the point. We're unhappy with our current arrangement with Carter and Associates. We've heard good things about your new venture." The meeting was scheduled for the following day. I spent the night preparing, reviewing everything. I knew about Westmark's operations, their pain points, their future plans. When I walked into their gleaming headquarters, I felt confident but realistic. Companies like Westmark didn't make decisions lightly. 3 hours later, I walked out with a tentative agreement. 1 week after that, the contract was signed, the largest in my company's short history. I took my team out to celebrate, watching as they laughed and toasted our success, seeing in them the same dedication I had once given to Carter, but now appreciated and rewarded. That evening, an email arrived from Jamie, my former colleague, who still worked for Carter. "You might want to know, the Westmark news hit hard here. Carter threw a fit, broke a glass in the conference room. First round of layoffs happened this afternoon. 10 people gone, more coming. The ship is sinking." I closed my laptop and stood by the window, watching the city lights blink on as dusk settled. There was no turning back now. My company wasn't just a desperate attempt to survive anymore. It was thriving, growing, succeeding where Carter was failing. Then came the email I never expected to receive. It arrived late on a Friday, its tone formally polite, but with an undercurrent of strain. "Melissa, I hope this finds you well. I wonder if we might meet to discuss a matter of mutual benefit. Carter Douglas." I read it 3 times, a slow smile spreading across my face. The man who had called me easily replaceable now needed something from me. I waited until Monday morning to reply, agreeing to meet at a cafe halfway between our offices. The choice was deliberate, neutral territory, but still a powerful message. I wasn't coming to him. Those days were over. I arrived at the cafe, 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the back with a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a cappuccino and reviewed emails on my phone, determined to appear busy and unbothered when Carter arrived. He walked in right on time, scanning the room until he spotted me. Even from a distance, the change in him was striking. The confident swagger was gone. His shoulders slumped slightly beneath his still expensive suit. The tie he wore, one I recognized from countless meetings, hung just a bit crooked, as if he'd adjusted it nervously multiple times. "Melissa," he said, extending his hand as he reached the table. I shook it briefly, noting his palm was slightly damp. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. "How have you been, Carter?" He ordered coffee, black, and made small talk about the weather until the server left. Then he leaned forward, fingers laced together on the table. "I'll be direct," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You've done remarkably well. Building a client base from scratch in this market. It's impressive. Truly." I nodded, saying nothing, waiting for what would come next. "I've been reevaluating things at the firm," he continued, his gaze dropping to his coffee cup. "The direction we're heading. The team we need to get there." A long pause stretched between us. I could have filled it, made this easier for him, but I didn't. Instead, I took a slow sip of my cappuccino and watched him squirm. "The thing is," he finally continued, voice lower now, "I think we made a mistake. With you." Another pause. "I was wondering," he cleared his throat. "I was hoping we might discuss the possibility of you coming back. In a leadership capacity, of course." I raised an eyebrow. "Coming back?" "Well, yes," he said, shifting in his seat. "Or perhaps a merger of our operations. A partnership." The desperation in his eyes belied the casualness he was attempting. "I see," I said, setting down my cup. "And what would this partnership look like?" For 20 minutes he outlined a proposal that amounted to me saving his dying company while he maintained control. His voice grew more animated as he described the synergies and mutual benefits, clearly rehearsed phrases that rang hollow in the quiet cafe. When he finally ran out of words, I waited a beat before responding. "And why would this arrangement appeal to me, Carter?" His confidence faltered. "Well, with our combined resources. My company is doing well, I interrupted gently. Very well, actually. What exactly would I gain? He stared at me, realization dawning slowly. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. This was a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. "Melissa," he started again, forcing a weak smile. "I respect what you've built. Truly." Another pause, longer this time. "I was wondering if you had a position for me." He winced saying it, as if the words burned his throat. I let the silence stretch, watching him grow increasingly uncomfortable across the small table. Carter Douglas, who had fired me without a second thought, who had called me replaceable to my face, was now asking me for a job. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of cups against saucers. Outside, people hurried past, wrapped up in their own lives, unaware of the small drama unfolding at our corner table. I studied Carter's face, the new lines around his eyes, the slight gray at his temples that hadn't been there when he'd fired me. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "You know, there's something I've been curious about, Carter." He perked up slightly, perhaps sensing an opening. "What's that?" "Do you remember what you said to me, the day you let me go?" I kept my voice calm, conversational even. His gaze flickered away, then back. "Melissa, that was... You told me I was easily replaceable," I continued, the words still carrying a sting despite everything that had happened since. "Those were your exact words." The color drained from his face. He stammered, "Melissa, that was true?" I finished for him, raising an eyebrow. "Is that what you were going to say? That it was true?" He sighed, rubbing his temples with manicured fingers. The heavy watch on his wrist, the one he'd always made sure clients noticed, slid down slightly. It looked too large for him now. "I was wrong," he said finally, the admission clearly painful. Obviously, I was wrong. Hearing him say it should have felt like victory. I'd imagined this moment during sleepless nights after being fired, pictured his regret, his realization of what he'd lost. But now that it was happening, I felt oddly hollow. "Why did you say it?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "You knew how hard I worked. You knew what I contributed." Carter stared into his coffee cup. "It wasn't personal," he murmured. "It's just business. That's what I told myself." "Just business," I repeated. "Is that what you're telling yourself now? That this," I gestured between us, "is just business?" "Two?" He looked up, a flash of the old Carter briefly visible. "Everyone makes mistakes, Melissa. Smart business people adapt, move forward, find solutions." He straightened his tie. "We could help each other. You need experienced leadership as you grow. I need a lifeline," I finished for him. The flash of irritation that crossed his face told me I'd hit the mark. He wasn't sorry for what he had done to me, just for where it had left him. "I'm offering you a mutually beneficial arrangement," he insisted, his voice regaining some of its old authority. "My experience, my industry connections." "The same connections who are now working with me?" I asked softly. I let him squirm for another moment before delivering my final blow. The words came easily, naturally. "Unfortunately, Carter, I don't have room for someone, so..." I paused, making sure he was looking directly at me. "Easily replaceable." I watched as realization sank in. His expression shifted from hopeful to shocked to resigned in the space of seconds. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Carter sat frozen, blinking rapidly as if trying to process what had just happened. I took another sip of my cappuccino, now lukewarm, and waited. Around us, the cafe continued its normal rhythm. Baristas calling out orders, the door chiming as customers came and went, soft music playing overhead. "I understand," he finally muttered, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise. Neither of us moved. In the silence that stretched between us, I realized I was seeing Carter, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as the intimidating boss who had controlled my professional life for years. Not as the villain who had callously discarded me. Just a man who had believed his own myth for too long. "I should go," he said, reaching for his jacket draped over the chair beside him. His movements were mechanical, as if he was operating on autopilot. I nodded. "Take care, Carter." He stood up, fumbling with his wallet before placing a $10 bill on the table for his barely touched coffee. "You too," he replied, not meeting my eyes. I watched as he made his way through the cafe, shoulders slumped, weaving between tables with none of his usual commanding presence. At the door, he paused, and for a moment I thought he might turn around, might try one more angle, one more pitch. Instead, his chin dropped a fraction lower, and he pushed through the door into the bright afternoon sunlight. Through the window, I could see him hesitate on the sidewalk, glancing left and right, as if unsure which way to go. A young couple brushed past him, laughing together, and he stepped aside, suddenly invisible in a way I knew he had never experienced before. He had walked into this meeting expecting mercy, or at least a business arrangement that might salvage something from the wreckage of his company. Instead, he had received the same cold dismissal he had given me. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. As Carter finally chose a direction and walked away, growing smaller with distance, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly. Justice served in the most poetic way possible. But there was also an unexpected sense of closure, as if a chapter that had been left painfully open was finally complete. I didn't feel guilt. Carter had built his success on arrogance and the belief that people like me were disposable. Today, he had learned how wrong he was. I had built something real, something lasting, something based on respect rather than fear. And he had nothing. The server approached, asking if I wanted another cappuccino. I checked my watch and declined. "Just the check, please. I have a meeting to get to." Walking back to my office, I felt lighter somehow. Not because of Carter's downfall, but because I no longer needed his approval or feared his judgment. I had moved beyond him entirely. Spring turned to summer, and my company continued to grow. I moved into larger offices, a bright corner space with windows overlooking the city. Every morning, I walked into the sound of keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and my team engaged in the buzz of productive work. I hired carefully, prioritizing not just skills but character. Many of my new employees came with stories similar to mine. Talented people, undervalued by previous employers, eager to prove themselves in an environment where their contributions would be recognized. I implemented policies I'd always wished for: flexible hours, remote work options, profit sharing. These weren't just perks. They were acknowledgments that my team's well-being directly affected our success. Sarah, my first hire, now headed our client relations department. "The Johnson account just renewed their contract," she announced one morning, grinning as she poked her head into my office. "They've increased their budget by 30%. "Great work," I replied, genuinely pleased. "That was all you." Her smile widened. "Team effort, but I'll take the credit." This was the culture I'd built. Collaborative but confident, supportive but driven. People stayed late when projects demanded it, not because they feared for their jobs, but because they took pride in their work. News about Carter's company continued to reach me, though I no longer sought it out. His downtown office, once the crown jewel of his empire, had been sublet. The remaining staff operated from a smaller location on the edge of the business district. Former clients still occasionally mentioned him, usually with a mixture of pity and disbelief at how quickly things had unraveled. "Did you hear Carter lost the Harrington account?" Michael from Apex mentioned during our quarterly review meeting. Apparently, he showed up unprepared, tried to wing it. Disaster. I nodded, but didn't comment. There was no satisfaction in hearing about his continued struggles. What had once felt like justified revenge now seemed merely sad, a cautionary tale about hubris and poor leadership. Some of Carter's former employees now worked for me. I hired them based on merit, not as trophies or to gather intelligence about his operation. To my surprise, they rarely mentioned him unprompted. When they did, it was without malice, as if discussing a distant relative who had made unfortunate choices. "The difference here is night and day," remarked James, a graphic designer who had joined us after 5 years with Carter. "I actually look forward to coming to work." That simple statement meant more to me than any revenue figure or client acquisition. I had created not just a successful business, but a place where people felt valued, where their work had meaning beyond a paycheck. My company flourished not because of greed or cutthroat tactics, but because we respected each other and our clients. We built relationships based on trust and followed through on our promises. These weren't revolutionary concepts, just basic principles that Carter had forgotten or never understood. The email arrived on a Tuesday evening as I was preparing to leave the office. From Jamie, my former co-worker who still occasionally sent updates. The subject line was simple: "Thought you should see this." Attached was a link to an article in the Business Journal. Carter and Associates closes after major client losses. I clicked through, scanning the brief report. The firm had officially shuttered its doors the previous Friday. Assets were being liquidated to pay creditors. Carter himself had declined to comment for the story. I sat back in my chair, reading the article a second time. The writer had interviewed several industry experts who cited changing market dynamics and failure to adapt to client expectations as factors in the company's demise. One paragraph mentioned the exodus of key clients over the past year, many of whom were now working with my firm, though the article didn't name us specifically. A strange feeling settled over me. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity. For so long, Carter had been the central antagonist in my story, the villain who had dismissed me, the obstacle I had overcome. And now, he was just gone. I closed my laptop and gazed out at the cityscape beyond my window, the same city where, just over a year ago, I had stood unemployed and uncertain about my future. The same skyline I had looked at while wondering how I would pay my next month's rent. Now, my company's logo glowed on the door behind me, and 28 people relied on the business I had built. On impulse, I opened my desk drawer and found the small cardboard box I kept there. Inside was my old employee badge from Carter and Associates, the one I'd been asked to surrender on that terrible day. I'd kept it as a reminder, though I wasn't entirely sure of what, maybe of how quickly security can be snatched away, or perhaps of how far I'd come since then. Now I understood its true significance. It wasn't about Carter at all. It never had been. It was about recognizing my own worth when others couldn't, or wouldn't. He had believed he was untouchable, that no one could challenge him. But he had underestimated the power of those he dismissed. And now, he was nothing more than a cautionary tale in industry circles, a conversation topic at networking events, a footnote in my journey. I placed the badge back in the drawer. There was no need to display it as a trophy or discard it as trash. Like Carter himself, it had lost its power over me. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Sarah stood there, car keys in hand. "Still on for dinner with the team? We're celebrating the Westridge expansion." I smiled, standing up and reaching for my coat. Wouldn't miss it. As we walked out together, staff members were gathering their things, calling goodnight to each other, making plans. This vibrant community hadn't existed a year ago. I had built it from nothing, from less than nothing, from the ashes of rejection. That, I realized, was the ultimate victory. Not watching Carter fall, but creating something meaningful in spite of him. 2 years passed. My company moved again, this time to a full floor in a downtown building. Our team grew to 50 people, then 70. Industry awards lined the reception area. Recognition, not just for our financial success, but for our innovative workplace policies and client satisfaction ratings. On a crisp fall morning, I arrived early at the office to prepare for a board meeting. As I walked through the still quiet workspace, I paused to straighten a picture frame on the wall. A group photo from our company retreat 6 months ago, everyone smiling on a sunny beach. So different from the corporate retreats at Carter's firm, where tension and competition had undercut any attempt at team building. My assistant arrived with coffee and the day's schedule. "The new client from Austin is confirmed for 11, she said, handing me a folder. "And that reporter from Business Monthly wants to reschedule your interview for next week." I nodded, scanning the materials. The magazine was doing a feature on women entrepreneurs who had transformed their industries. The irony wasn't lost on me. Carter had once been the one profiled in such publications. Midway through the morning, between meetings, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure through the glass doors of our reception area. For a moment, my heart stuttered. It looked like Carter. But as the man turned, I saw it was someone else entirely, just a client with a similar build and haircut. The brief mistaken identity made me realize something remarkable. I couldn't remember the last time I'd thought about Carter. He had once occupied so much space in my mind, first as a boss I desperately wanted to impress, then as the person who had callously dismissed me, and finally as a competitor I had outmaneuvered. Now, he was barely a memory. Carter's downfall hadn't been my goal. It was just the inevitable consequence of his arrogance. My real victory was the life I'd built, a thriving business, a supportive team, and a future entirely on my own terms. That evening, as the office emptied, I walked to the large windows overlooking the city. The same skyline I had stared at during those dark days after losing my job now represented something different. Possibility, growth, resilience. I wasn't just replaceable, I was unstoppable. And that knowledge didn't come from defeating Carter. It came from discovering what I was capable of when forced to rely on myself. As I gathered my things to leave, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner with the team at Tony's, celebrating the Austin deal." I smiled and replied that I'd be there in 20 minutes. Walking toward the elevator, I passed the company mission statement mounted on the wall, words I had written myself during those first uncertain days of building something new. Success isn't about outperforming others. It's about outperforming yourself. Carter had never understood that, but I did, and that made all the difference.